Hey there. I wanted to make a little bit different video than normal here because, well, let's be honest. This channel is nothing if not just a series of free advertising videos for Games Workshop. And while I love what they do with my favorite game, Warcry, and I'm happy to, help them succeed, I do want to just point out that there's some really incredible sculptors in the space that can be part of the hobby just because, you know, this is a game that a corporation sells to you and you play it. It doesn't mean that that game is all that the hobby is. There's a ton of really incredible artists who have cropped up in the last 2 years who are making really amazing stuff that I think it's time to showcase a little bit. So I want to get into it. I think we'll start with Artisan Guild. How about? So Artisan Guild makes a whole bunch of little sets like this, but their Frost Metal Clan especially I think is perfect for Ironjaws. I think the Games Workshop Ironjaws stuff is really good, some of their best sculpts, but this stuff is great too. And I think one of the weaknesses of that range is that the wizard doesn't really look like an Ironjaw. But this wizard does. I think this wizard is really buff like the rest of the Ironjaws. And then, I love its little little skeleton minions with kind of fire coming off of them as well. There's plenty of armor in this set, so I think that it'll fit in really well with your Ironjaws. It's really cheap to find on Etsy. And then, they've got sculpts for a bunch of different pieces of that army, right? They've got 5 here that could stand in for brutes. They've got a few that could stand in, or sorry, 3 here that could stand in for brutes, 5 here that could stand in for Ardboys. They've got cavalry sculpts. They've got a mega boss. I actually think that the GW mega boss is one of the best sculpts that they've ever made for a foot hero, but this one's really good too, and I think it fits the aesthetic going on here. So to put an Ironjaw's warband together, either you buy their start collecting for $95, or you're actually mix and matching quite a few kits. But this you can find on Etsy for pretty cheap, and you can make a warband just from kits that are in this, and so it's a really great, I think, budget way to play that faction and have kind of your own twist on it. I also want to talk about Lost Kingdom. They've got a ton of stuff that works well in Warcry, but I'll start with Seraphon. They have a proxy for every single Seraphon unit, and some have extras like Croxigors. You can either have Snapping Turtle Croxigors or Crocodile Croxigors. Their skinks, they're either going to be javelins or archers, so that obviously fits for javelin skinks, but for blowpipe skinks, I think you'll be fine proxying in the archers. But there's a lot of really old sculpts in Seraphon, and that's a big place where I think third parties can really help serve you is with sort of ranges that GW has kind of left by the wayside a little bit. Now, a big update to the Seraphon range is on the way, rumored, with GW, but there's really amazing stuff out there right now with third parties. So, for example, the current Cold One riders, the current Saurus Knights, are a little derpy looking, and I think these ones from Lost Kingdom are incredible. The dinosaurs that they're riding look threatening. The weapons are really cool. The headdresses are sweet. I like everything about them. I really like my GW Slan that I have, but this one's really amazing. This one's really impressive. Their take on the floating throne is really cool, I think. If I was going to run a Slan that wasn't Croak, this would be the one I would get. And Lost Kingdom has a bunch of stuff for Cities of Sigmar too. Another GW range that has kind of fallen by the wayside. So I think the GW Sisters of Thorn are amazing. But if I was gonna run 2 sets of them in an army, I would absolutely check out these sort of fox riding elves here from Lost Kingdom. I think this archer set is a really incredible replacement for the Wanderers archers. I'm blanking on their names. I keep wanting to call them Eternal Guard, but I know that that's not it. That's the Wanderer swordsman. But yeah, either way, this archer set I think is really incredible. Um, and they've got other lines for Cities of Sigmar too, right? They've got sort of various free guild proxies going on here with these sort of people. They've got a ton of different dark elf proxies. So you can make like dread spears out of these folks. They've got really cool cold one riders. Again, another sculpt that I think the GW one is you know, a little dated. You can use these, they call them Onabu geishas, which I guess is like dark geishas. You can use these as proxies for shadow warriors. They've even got a few hero models, right? Like you could have your sorcerer on Black Dragon here. So just a ton of different options for all sorts of Cities of Sigmar proxies. You know, cities is something where you're already kind of encouraged to go your own way with that army. And I think if you're going to run it in Warcry, it's really easy to, you know, pick and choose from these models, especially because you can usually get them one at a time on, you know, from 3D printers on Etsy, which is especially great because, you know, in Age of Sigmar, the way free cities run is like you're encouraged to do power pairs where you know, go all in mostly on one race, like mostly dark elves or mostly wanderers or mostly free guild, to create kind of a synergy silo. But in Warcry, that's not really true. In Warcry, you know, you pick your city, which gives you some abilities, but after that, you're kind of incentivized to pick and choose the strongest unit for each role within the whole roster, which often means, you know, you've got a real mix, which is, I think, kind of what cities is supposed to be. But when you're doing that, it's kind of easier to start collecting it if you actually go this sort of grabbing one model at a time way, so that you're not buying, you know, 5 different kits to make a warband. And I think these Lost Kingdom proxies really enable you to do that. They'll be extremely convincing on the tabletop, and you know, I'd love to see someone give it a try. So moving on to Soulblight Gravelords, I think Highland Miniatures does some really awesome sculpts there. This is another range where GW's sort of recently revamped about half of it, and their stuff is really incredible, but the Graveguard sculpts are still really old. There's no Hell Knights, right? Like, they released those incredible Blood Knights, but you know, the skeletons on skeletal horseback are kind of old, kind of dated. They released one hero on skeleton horse to kind of show you they mean business and as far as what they could create, but they didn't actually send that out to the whole line. So I think these Highland sculpts, I think, are really good for, you know, if you want to replace those old ones by GW. You'll notice that theme a lot is me kind of talking about replacing kind of some of the older, more dated GW sculpts. But you've got kind of 2 different options for Graveguard that could work. I mean, you've got these kind of northern Viking skeletons, or you've got these sort of heavily armored ones here. I think either one could work great. It would stand out from your skellies in your SBG force without necessarily kind of looking like it's not on the same team. Speaking of which, like, I have a Plague Priest from Archvillain Games that is perfect. You can see it here for standing out from all my Plague Monks without, you know, it still looks like it shops at the same store. This is one of these ones here. So the Affliction Outbreak is Archvillain Games' Skaven release, and all of their sort of foot characters here work incredibly well for Skaven foot heroes. You know, they've got essentially 5 different options for really cool Plague Priest sculpts. The same is true for, you know, some of their Clan Verminous stuff. They've got ones that would fit in perfectly as Master Molders, you know, which I really like because some of the old Skaven heroes are pretty dated. They don't really look that special on the tabletop. Whereas these, they really stand out. They clearly still fit with the Skaven line. And then they've also got great monster options. So I got this one who's holding the hangman here, and he's got like a huge bell. turned out to be a little bit too big to proxy in as a rat ogre like I wanted. So just a really cool model. Probably going to have to be a hell pit abomination. That's true for probably this brood mother as well. Probably the same with this big priest. But you could probably work with your 3D printer to scale them down to make them kind of more rat ogre size if you wanted to run them in Warcry, and I think that would probably work out great. So a lot to work with here with the Affliction cyst, and then you know, if you did want to run a whole Skaven army, you know, these could be your monsters and your heroes, and I think it would work really well. So this is a line that I don't think is necessarily something where you make your entire warband from this line, but it's an amazing little like statement piece to go into a small Skaven warband that I think can be really cool. Going more into just those one statement piece in your warband, I think the Zealot Miniatures Doombull options are incredible. So pretty much anything with just one big two-handed axe can be a Doombull. And Zealot Miniatures has a bunch of different options for that. They've got, you know, this guy with the spiked skull hat. They've got this sort of more armored version. They've got this one where the axe is kind of almost too big for him to handle. They've got another one that's called like a general that is out of stock at the moment. But just with these three options, I think this is all the Doombulls you would ever need. So there you go. There's some great TV, me drinking some water, but just to let you really bask in the amazement of these Doombull sculpts. So it's just a regular Beast of Chaos sculpt, I think. Or regular Beast of Chaos warband with one of these leading it, I think would be really amazing. You know, as something to just have as your leader option. I also want to talk about Txarli Factory. I'm not sure if it's meant to be pronounced that way or if it's sort of a Arlington, Texas reference or if it's a Mesoamerican reference, but they have a really incredible Ogre Mawtribes line. Artisan Guild also has a pretty good Mawtribes line, but something I love about these ones is that, and people kind of go back and forth on this. So what I love is that they have something for every single Ogre unit that is eligible in Warcry. Even Yetis and Mournfang Cav are kind of represented in their line. Now, sort of some people will kind of poo-poo that as a little bit too shamelessly sort of copying GW, but I think it's a great service, honestly. You know, some of the Ogre sculpts in GW's line, you know, it has a certain look to it, and that look is pretty popular. You know, I've made jokes in the past about wargamers liking ogres because it reminds us of ourselves, but you know, GW's line is popular for a reason, but personally I kind of like this one better. You know, maybe you could argue that their gluttons and their iron guts are a little bit too similar, but I think you could argue that about the GW ones too. But what I really love is the Bombardiers. I think if you were going to run a like double Thunderfist warband with a bunch of these Noblars, it would be really easy to kind of pick and choose which Bombardier models you want someone to 3D print for you, and then just like the right Noblars, they have Gorger sculpts if you want to go that direction. And then you'd have something that's really clearly strictly WYSIWYG, which, you know, some tournaments care about, some shops care about, but would still be like your own kind of very standout aesthetic on the Ogre Mawtribes concept. You know, you can essentially print an entire army of these as well if you want to. The only thing they're missing is the Thundertusk / Stonehorn. So that could be a deal breaker for some, but I think it's perfect for Warcry where you can't play your Thundertusks anyway. So yeah, absolutely something where if I was going to try out Ogre Mawtribes for Warcry, I would probably go this direction with, you know, a couple Bombardiers, a bunch of Scraplings, maybe a Tribe Ogre or two. Yeah, something like that. I also want to talk about CreatureCaster. So they have been kind of the biggest, at least for me, my awareness of kind of third-party sculpts and sort of cheaper alternatives to big GW centerpieces really started with CreatureCaster. I have a CreatureCaster Bloodthirster that, yeah, I really like. Also, to more sort of centerpieces. I have the Archvillain Games Corn Demon Prince. They have a bunch of cool Demon Prince models, a bunch of Tzeentch Demon Princes as well. So there's a lot of options for sort of the big demon pieces, but CreatureCaster is more recently, at least for their Nurgle line, created a whole bunch of options for the smaller troops as well, and that's something that you can something you can use in Warcry. So they have these sort of not plague bearers that I think are just really metal. So if that's kind of your aesthetic, I think that this sort of serves that really well. GWs, Nurgle can often, so it's very gross and disgusting, and so they kind of balance that out with a big sense of humor. But if you want to go sort of more of a horrifying route, I think these really have you covered. I think their sort of foot troops are really horrifying. Their 6 leader options are, again, really scary. Not even gonna talk too much about each of these. You have them on screen. You can see how horrifying they are. But I do think that they would work, in a bunch of different ways. I think the wizardy one could easily be Spoilpox. I think the bell musician could be Sloppity, right? Like, Sloppity doesn't have to have bagpipes. It could just be any musician, and I think you could proxy that fine at pretty much any table. I think most people would just be so impressed that you have an entire lineup of Nurgle stuff that kind of fits the aesthetic that I think most people would let it go. Whether you wanted to try to sort of bring something like this Cleaver guy in as a Beast of Nurgle would be kind of up to you. That's a more sort of loose proxy. I think some people would allow it. Some people would look at you a certain way about it. But overall, I think this is really incredible as kind of a new take on an existing faction. I think the Nurgle line from DW is generally really good, but this is a really cool sort of change to it that I think might be worthwhile for a lot of people. So for narrative play, right, my channel mostly focuses on the more competitive part of the game, not because I think it's more worthwhile, but because even narrative players often are more interested in that. But I still think that there's a lot that you can play with that I haven't explored necessarily with that. So this group of kind of Ninja Turtles, I think, could be really cool for narrative play in Warcry. Does it fit a faction? Not really, right? You'd have to kind of make something up for it and make it be a pure counts as. But I think that would be cool, right? Like, you could make these as OCR Turtle Reapers. Really anything where there's kind of a really exciting hero mixed with big troops and little troops, I think would work for this really well. That's why I sort of chose OCR, because you could have more tech and stalkers, something like that. But you could go a ton of different directions with something like this. Clay Cyanide have a few things like this. Some of them, like, they have one set that works very clearly in Beasts of Chaos that you could try out. But in general, I think they just have some really imaginative stuff that you could kind of go wild with. And I don't have time really to go through all of it. So there's some other really cool artists in the space that I wanted to just mention at least. 3D Art Guy has a ton of different things, mostly bigger centerpieces. Like, I've often been tempted to try to get the 3D Art Guy version of the Keeper of Secrets as kind of a cheaper Keeper of Secrets alternative. BCRM Miniatures also has a Keeper of Secrets, and just a whole bunch of stuff in kind of the more, I think you'd call it Dark Souls aesthetic, sort of a very specific flavor of Gothic horror. Titan Forge, Lord of the Print, Dragon Trapper's Lodge, Clay Beast Creations. These are all things that, you can search them on Etsy and find really incredible stuff. I think Lord of the Print's D&D dragons are all something that you can bring in and say that you're playing Karazai. And of course, you'd be spending half of what Karazai costs for a sculpt that, you could argue is more impressive. Certainly, I think that this Black Dragon one, I prefer to the Stormcast one. Different people's mileage may vary there, but it's definitely something worth checking out. These Dragon Trapper's Lodge Dryads, I think, are really cool. I do like the GW Dryads quite a bit, but one thing with that is if it's an entire forest sort of awakening and coming after you, in my opinion, Sylvaneth sculpts should be kind of very varied because, you know, trees are incredibly varied. So having some 3D prints like that in your Sylvaneth warband can be really cool. I just wanted to kind of do this roundup because for me, the one thing that's really changed the most since I've been in the hobby, I've been collecting and painting and playing with miniatures for a little over 4 years now. You know, if you don't count the times that I did it as a kid. And the thing that's really changed the most is when I first got into it and I was looking for sort of variety to sprinkle in against the GW line or along with the GW line. It was really hard. People would point you to like other games like Kings of War where the sculpts were just frankly not on the same level as what GW does, as far as like really big heads and hands that, you know, at their best work in like a kind of cartoonish aesthetic that I can sometimes really like with that Artisan Guild stuff. That works really well in kind of that cartoonish aesthetic, but other times it would just look amateurish. And what's changed is first there were really good kind of resin mold options, like CreatureCaster has been around for a little while now, that you could find, but those would generally focus on centerpieces only. And what's kind of really changed is the rise of 3D print sculpts that are on par with GW. Now, I haven't seen a 3D printer kind of produce the level of detail that, you know, say this Kurnoth Hunter has. But that's right now just on 3D printing technology, not on the sculpts themselves. I think when you look at the files, they're absolutely as intricate and as interesting as what GW is producing. I wouldn't be surprised if we're only like 2-3 years away from 3D printers hitting the market that can actually match what GW is doing with their, I think it's like injection molded plastic right now. And, you know, the posing is really incredible on a lot of those. I know that, you know, so 3D printed resin is a little heavier than, say, GW plastic is. It's a little more breakable if you drop it. You know, that could be an issue if you have sort of an army that has a lot of bodies, something like that. Something like Warcry, though, is really sort of really lends itself to just having a few things that are really easy to take care of all of them. You can have a little case that stores all of them. And so I think the fragility is a little bit less of an issue in Warcry, just because you have less to keep track of. And, you know, with a lot of sort of more compact shaped models with not a lot kind of coming off of them, that's not going to be an issue anyway, right? So for example, those Ogor models, you know, they're all very like kind of heavily muscled and compact. And I think in general, you know, you're not going to have an issue with that kind of thing breaking. So yeah, just really incredible evolution, especially just the last 2 years of more and more artists entering the space, doing incredible work, that, you know, you can just either buy your own 3D printer, which is very expensive, and I wouldn't actually suggest for any normal person, but taking advantage of other people's 3D printers on Etsy, where you can just put in a search term for any of this stuff and find it for, you know, a little bit less money than GW prices. I think for the really well 3D printed with really small layer heights, you will find yourself paying, you know, it won't just be free. You'll find yourself paying not quite GW prices, but a little bit, you know, higher. But that's for quality that's, you know, right on par, and that's making kind of your own kind of statement on the tabletop, which, you know, this is a Johnny game. It's about making your own expression. And I think, yeah, that can be a really amazing thing to do. So I'll be back with more kind of gaming focused Warcry stuff in the future. I've got a big kind of competitive primer to Adepticon video that I'm planning out to hopefully come out in sort of very early February. So until that time, may all your rolls be crits, and hopefully you'll enjoy this sort of more casual content.